Welcome to the Susan LoPresti Wellness Mind, Body, and Soul podcast, the go-to space for midlife and mature women who are ready to reclaim their health, boost their energy, and live long, vibrant, and purposeful lives. Each week, we dive deep into natural wellness, holistic healing, anti-aging strategies, and healthy lifestyle habits to help you feel your best physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Today's guest is Dr. Kristine Burke. She is a triple board certified precision medicine physician, entrepreneur, author, educator, and researcher. Dr. Burke received her Bachelor of Science in General Chemistry from UCLA and her medical doctorate from UC Davis School of Medicine. She went on to complete residency and serve as the chief resident in family medicine at UC Davis and fellowships at UC Davis, UC Berkeley, and UC San Francisco. She is the founder and executive medical director of True Health Center for Precision Medicine in Northern California, a multidisciplinary practice providing an array of specialized consultation services to define and address the root causes of disease. Dr. Burke is an expert in the reversal and prevention of chronic diseases such as dementia, diabetes, heart attacks, and strokes, with a special focus on mold-related illness and its connection to many health conditions. Stemming from her clinical outcomes, excellence, and research into promoting brain health and reversing the cognitive decline of early dementia and Alzheimer's disease, she co-founded Trunora with its unique all-supported patient coaching interface and provider-focused clinical decision support software, advancing the mission to scale the prevention and reversal of cognitive decline worldwide. To further this mission, she teaches precision and functional medicine to advance the knowledge of other physicians and practitioners. In her role as assistant clinical professor of preventative medicine at Loma Linda University School of Medicine and as an educator and speaker for national and international organizations. Without further ado, Dr. Burke, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited about this conversation and I can't wait to get started.
I'm really happy to be here, excited to talk about this topic as well.
Great, that's great. So I have a bunch of questions for you. You've said that diabetes and prediabetes are dramatically underdiagnosed in women over 40. What makes midlife such a vulnerable and often overlooked time for metabolic decline?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a number of factors that play into the abnormalities that develop in our blood sugar metabolism. And one of the most important ones that happens to us women in midlife is, of course, perimenopause and menopause. And during that time of hormonal change, we see pretty dramatic shifts in the way that our body handles our blood sugar metabolism. We see increases in what's called insulin resistance, where the cells don't respond properly to the insulin signal. And that leads to having more of the sugar left in our blood. So it's a really vulnerable time period, but it's also often a time when women are experiencing a lot of other symptoms that go along with that, and a lot of attention gets focused on those symptoms. And so many times this metabolic problem that's developing goes unnoticed or
Right.
dismissed.
Right. Yeah. That actually happened to me at that time as
Mhm.
well, that I was a little bit raised. Many women assume that diabetes is hereditary and or inevitable, right?
Mm.
So can you explain why type 2 diabetes is in most cases a lifestyle-driven disease and it can be a reversible condition as well?
Yeah, those are great topics for us to chat about.
Great.
So, because diabetes so often does run in families, it is not unreasonable that people have concluded that it's something that's inherited. But what you're actually inheriting is the way your body responds to your lifestyle choices. And when we say lifestyle choices, we mean your food choices, your diet, your exercise and movement, your stress management, your sleep. All of these are what we call our lifestyle factors. And I know you work with that all the time.
Yes.
So when we're looking at something that's running in a family, it's because the body has come equipped to respond in specific ways to certain groupings of lifestyle choices. So we get this seemingly hereditary thing, which is really just inheriting the vulnerability to that. And the reason that that's a super important differentiation is that we can completely change whether or not someone develops type 2 diabetes by changing those lifestyle factors. So, someone who has a lot of diabetes in their family is going to be more likely to respond to a high glycemic diet, a diet that's high in sweet things, sugary things, simple carbs like, bread, crackers, cakes, cookies, things like that, things made with flour. They're going to respond with a much higher blood sugar response, and they're going to develop insulin resistance, that failure of the cell to respond to the insulin signal and take the glucose in to use it as fuel. They're going to instead respond to that with resistance, and then the glucose is not useful in the cell. So not only do you have more sugar in the blood, which is damaging to many, many of the body's tissues, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point, but you also get a failure to have enough fuel inside the cell. And gradually over time, that is manifested as a loss of energy. So we feel like, we're getting tired because we're aging, but really much of that fatigue can often be tracked back to the way our body is no longer metabolizing glucose, blood sugar, in the way that it should.
Right. That answers that question. Do you see a lot of people reversing type 2 diabetes in your practice?
All the time. In fact,
Wow.
we are way more successful at reversing diabetes than not reversing it. It is once you understand that those root causes, the way that the body is fueled, because we come genetically programmed to respond to food differently.
Mhm.
And then our choices for all of those lifestyle factors, food being a big one in this particular instance, also change the gut microbiome, the bacteria that are supposed to be in our gut, that then further change the way our body responds to the foods that we eat. And so the bacteria that become part of our community in our gut can completely change the way we respond to the exact same food. So it isn't just about how we're programmed, but it's how our gut microbiome is programmed. So
Mhm.
that's one factor. So we can change that gut microbiome by changing the food, by providing the right sources of fiber, by eliminating the things that create chronic inflammation and increase something we call oxidative stress, which is damaging. The most common thing we're used to that's oxidative stress is rust. So kind of rusting from the inside out.
Yeah.
So these factors will alter the way our body responds to the foods that we eat. And that allows us to very specifically, personalized and individually determine what each person's body needs to be able to reverse that diabetes. Then we use some targeted supplements to help improve the insulin sensitivity, to replace some of the nutrients that often become depleted when we have that state where our blood sugar is running too high. And we're not just talking about diabetes, we're also talking about that pre-diabetes zone. And I'd love
Yeah.
some time to chat about that too, because that gets swept under the rug all the time. But when we alter the way that signaling happens and we start to provide the body with fuel, food, in the way that it responds best, then that whole problematic metabolism just goes away.
Mm.
We don't need medications to control the blood sugar anymore. We don't need insulin to control the blood sugar anymore. In fact, the first day that we start people on their new food plan, we usually have to drop the insulin doses by half the first day.
Wow. So let's go back to talk about pre-diabetes. I
Yeah.
guess we should have started with that, but that's fine.
So We in medicine, we've kind of created this different category of waiting for disease, right? So we have pre-hypertension, the time frame when your blood pressure is not normal, but it's not quite meeting the criteria for high blood pressure or hypertension. And we have the same with diabetes, where we have pre-diabetes, where your blood sugar metabolism is not normal, but it doesn't quite meet the finish line to be called diabetes. And oftentimes that time frame is ignored. So someone comes in to see their doctor, they have their blood sugar checked. The three things that you want to have checked are your fasting blood glucose or blood sugar, your fasting insulin level, and your hemoglobin A1C, which is the long range blood sugar
Yeah.
average. So when we see that those things, one or all of those things, are out of balance in that middle range, then someone will be told, oh, it looks like you have prediabetes. Let's check it next year and see where you are. And then once you cross the finish line, then all these medications get thrown at you to try to manage that high blood sugar. But what we have with prediabetes is the opportunity to turn that train around. We don't have to wait until it becomes the full-blown disease because between a normal hemoglobin A1C, which should be less than 5.2, and a hemoglobin A1C of prediabetes, which is 5.7, we can see a doubling of the risk for heart disease. So that's still in the range where conventional medicine considers it to be normal, but it's high normal. Then we have the prediabetes zone where damage is really happening to your blood vessels, around your heart, in your entire body, in your brain, in your kidneys. And that's why by the time someone gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they have the exact same risk of having a heart attack as someone who has already had one. That's how much damage has been done to the blood vessels by that high sugar and then all the things that the body does to try to control that. We
Yeah.
have all that damaging happen before we actually even call it a problem.
Are there any early signs of prediabetes?
Usually, prediabetes is completely without symptoms. That's what makes it so important to find. The only way you're really going to find that is by doing the blood tests.
Right, right.
Mhm. By the time we get to type 2 diabetes, that's when people will more often have symptoms, fatigue, increased hunger, increased urination, but those happen when the blood sugar is very, very high.
Yeah. So, for women listening who feel overwhelmed, what's the most empowering first step that they can take to understand their true metabolic health?
So, those three tests that I mentioned are going to be the most important three. So, the fasting blood sugar is both a marker of the types of foods that you're eating, but since that's usually done in the morning, it's also telling us about your metabolism during the night when you're not being fueled. Right?
Yeah,
You're not, well, you shouldn't be eating during the middle of the
right.
night. Hopefully, you're not. That's something you can do. So, because of that, it gives us a unique window, a perspective on what's happening in the metabolism beyond just what the person is eating. So it really gives us some important information. Then that next piece is the fasting insulin. So the fasting insulin, so insulin is the hormone that your pancreas makes that tells your cells, hey, food is coming. It's time to bring those blood sugar receptors to the surface of the cell so that they can soak up that glucose and bring it inside the cell to use it to make fuel, to make energy,
Right,
ATP. And so when you're fasting and there is no stimulation from your digestive system to make insulin, your insulin level should be low. It should be less than 6. And really, ideally, probably more like about 4. That should be where your fasting insulin level is. So, as we start to see these increases in the fasting insulin level, we start to see that next phase of abnormality in how the body's metabolism is working. So the insulin levels start to rise. So that's problematic in several ways. One, insulin itself is toxic directly to the blood vessels. And that's part of the reason that we see so much damage to the blood vessels in that time frame of the high normal and then the prediabetes and then the time frame that someone is diabetic. That's part of the reason why we see damage to the blood vessels. The
Yes.
other part is because that high blood sugar, the body recognizes that that's poisonous to us. So it tries to get rid of that sugar. So it tries to stuff it into places that it doesn't belong, and it melts it irreversibly onto our proteins. The protein that we measure for that is the hemoglobin. And that's where the hemoglobin, A1C, that's where that measurement comes from. So it's how much of your hemoglobin in your red blood cells, right? What's supposed to be carrying oxygen, how much of that hemoglobin has sugar melted onto it because the body needed somewhere to stuff it, right? Under the rug, in the closet, in the attic. Your body's
Right.
trying to get rid of it because it knows that it's very damaging to your blood vessels. So it sticks it onto that hemoglobin, and then we can measure that, how much of your hemoglobin has that sugar melted to it. And that's what we're measuring with hemoglobin A1C. But that's only one protein in the body. So many other proteins will have that sugar melted onto them to try to have a place to put it. And that creates damage to those proteins. Many of those proteins are enzymes, so they have a job to do. They convert one thing to another thing for communication or tissue healing or repair or our immune response, like all of these different ways that the body is working and communicating internally are dependent on these protein and enzyme processes. So once we start sticking sugar onto those, then they don't work as well.
Mm.
Also, we know from melted sugar when we've baked or, when we've used it before, how sharp that can be. So those sugar molecules melted onto our proteins also can make them sharp, and that can be very damaging to the cells,
Oh,
especially the cells that line our blood vessels. Now, think about it. If your blood vessels are being damaged by lots of little tiny cuts, and those blood vessels happen to be in your brain, then the result of that is that we start to see cognitive decline and we start to see this increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, for example, and other types of dementia. So that's how the blood sugar correlates to both our high cardiovascular risk and our high risk for cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease.
wow. And as I'm listening to you, I know people in my life who have diabetes and they don't take it seriously and they say, well, I'm on medicine, so I could eat whatever I want. And I'm like, no, that's not the way it works. But to hear this, it's really no joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very serious disease, and if it could be reversed by lifestyle changes, I don't understand why more people don't try to do that.
I agree with you. I think, part of it is that we've developed this sort of silver bullet thinking in medicine, and that really stemmed, in my opinion, a very wise friend of mine, Tom Blue, has talked about this many times, the different eras of medicine. And this era of medicine, this silver bullet era, kind of came or stemmed from the antibiotic era. So when antibiotics were first discovered, they were a miracle and they helped to save so many people from death from infectious diseases. And then from that, we developed this mentality that there's a pill, a silver bullet that will
Mhm.
solve every problem. And that's really what medicine has been focused on the last 30, 40, 50 years. And
Yes.
what we've found is that while that can be absolutely true, particularly for things that we call acute illnesses or, like acute processes or injuries or things of that nature.
Yeah.
But what we're finding now over the last couple of decades is our chronic diseases, things like diabetes, things like heart disease, things like dementia, hypertension, all of these chronic diseases, they don't respond in the same way to medications. So,
Right.
what we really end up accomplishing with the medication is just covering up the way the body is trying to signal us that something is wrong. So, we're masking the way the body is trying to communicate with us, but we really aren't, in most cases, we really aren't addressing the root causes.
Right.
And when we address the root causes, then we can see that disease be reversed.
Yeah. And so many people think that just taking a pill is the answer to everything when it really is not.
No, it really isn't. And a great example of that is that, controlling the blood sugar is important. So you certainly don't want to be a diabetic and not doing that. But ideally, you want to be a diabetic who's reversing your
Yeah.
diabetes. And here's why. Because diabetics, who are one of the most highly medicated subpopulations in medical care, they have a rate of dying from cardiovascular disease, so heart attacks and strokes. That's about 66 to 70% of diabetics die from that cause. The non-diabetic population, that's only 50%. So all that medication that we're giving to control the blood sugars is not taking away the increased damage that we're seeing from the metabolic problem, not just looking at the blood sugar.
Yeah. So I want to go on. You call midlife a pivot point. How can women start reframing this season from one of decline to one of reinvention?
I think that a lot of the reason that we see midlife as a turning point towards decline is because we've been taught to focus on the wrong things. We've been told that, diet is important, exercise is important, but we really haven't done a great job of connecting the dots for exactly how that is or why that is. And I have a good example of that. We all are familiar with the expression, you are what you eat.
Yes.
But but what does that really mean, right? Like you don't eat an apple and become an apple. You don't eat, right? Like you don't eat kale and become kale. So what does it really mean? And it's more than just the nutrient piece, right? Food is actually information. So, food is not just calories, and we focused for so long just on the caloric content of different foods, but we didn't really focus at all on the nutrient information, the food information, the polyphenols, the chemicals that give all of our fruits and vegetables those brilliant, beautiful colors, and the plant antioxidants that are in those foods. So we really can create an entirely different language within the body by choosing foods that harmonize with the way that we're designed to work. So, an easy example of this is you can just think about it. If you have one hand with 100 calories worth of, I'll pick on Skittles, and another hand with 100 calories worth of broccoli, you can just look at that and those are not going to have the same impact in your body, but
Right.
they have the exact same number of calories. And that really illustrates that difference. So part of the turning point is because we haven't learned how to fuel our bodies in a way that's livable, that is not a fad diet, that is really focused on using food to create health, and food is information. And when we do that, then we don't really have that turning point. We really ease or breeze through that middle age time point without there being a lot of fallout other than the hormonal changes.
Right.
So I think the turning point comes because prior to menopause, or perimenopause, we have more tolerance in our metabolism. Many of us do. Many people, many younger women get diabetes now as well. Like we're at like 50% of our female population over 40 has either diabetes or prediabetes.
Wow.
Half, half. It's a
That's
staggering number.
terrible. That's
Yeah,
terrible.
it's an absolutely staggering number. So we haven't been taught what we need to do for our bodies to be prepared for this transition. And then during menopause, as we talked about at the beginning, we have that shift in the hormones, which then triggers a shift in our insulin resistance. And we naturally develop a little bit more insulin resistance and higher levels of glucose. So if we were teetering before, then that becomes the tipping point that can shift us into full blown diabetes or more significant prediabetes.
What about blood sugar stability? How does that influence mood, energy, sleep, brain clarity, especially during hormonal transitions like perimenopause? I
Yeah.
know for me, my brain was shot during perimenopause, but it got better.
Yes, so yes to all of the above. So, I think as we're talking about all the ways that blood sugar is about so much more than just the blood sugar, that it's
Yes.
about all these other systems, our cellular communication, our gut microbiome, our vascular health, all of these things together. When we look really at blood sugar and mood, for example, and
Yeah.
then mood lability that is accentuated during the perimenopausal transition and transition into menopause, we really see a lot of that correlating with the state of the gut microbiome. We have this communication pathway from our gut, our intestines, to our brain, a direct actually communication pathway through a nerve called our vagus nerve.
Hmm.
And that is what sends signals, actually 10 times more signals from our gut to our brain than from our brain to our gut.
Oh, interesting.
So we have this strong pathway of communication that is telling our brain about what's going on in the state of our intestinal tract. So not just the balance of bacteria, but the balance of the blood sugar, the status of the immune system, the amount of inflammation, the amount of damage to the lining of the intestines. So all of that information is being transmitted back up to our brain. And at the same time, those imbalances can create damage to the lining of the intestines. That's called intestinal permeability, or leaky gut is the common phrase. And that allows things that are supposed to stay inside the gut. It allows those things to get into the bloodstream, into the tissue, stimulate our immune system, and those problems are also transmitted to the brain. So it's these imbalances really that create the mood lability or the changes in how we feel, in our fatigue, in our mental clarity. One of the things that our diabetes reversal group patients will often comment on is how much more mental clarity they have within the first couple of weeks of starting their program. It
Wow.
really can happen very quickly that we see that the brain fog, as you mentioned, and some of the other symptoms, feeling less motivated, certainly the fatigue, like the increase in energy is one of the
Hmm.
most profound changes that we love to watch. You literally get to see people transform before your eyes.
Yeah,
It's
that must be the
spectacular.
best feeling in the world, right? To be
Yes.
part of that. Talk about the gut. How could women improve their gut? And also, what would feed the gut that would make it healthier and not have the lining of the intestines so permeable?
Yeah,
And can
so
that be reversed where it
absolutely.
tightens up? Okay.
Absolutely. And there are so many things that contribute to this. All of the lifestyle factors that we've talked about, the
Mm-hmm.
food pieces for the reasons that we've talked about those. But as you're developing that leaky gut and things, bigger things like larger proteins, larger food particles are getting across the gut barrier and
Yes.
getting exposed to the immune system, that can start to trigger an immune response. And that creates inflammation, food related inflammation. Interestingly, that can also cause your blood sugar to go up. So you could be eating perfectly good choices of foods, but because you have intestinal permeability that hasn't been healed up, they can still be problematic for you. That's why wearing a continuous glucose monitor can be the little patch that you can put on your
Yes.
arm. That can be so very informative. And that's one of the things that our listeners can potentially do is you can really start to see the patterns of what your food choices are causing in your blood sugar response. And they can be really surprising. Like a very seemingly healthy food can give you a significant rise in your blood sugar. But combining that with something with a protein can give you a very normal blood sugar response. So you can really learn about how you need to modify the way that the choices that you're making, and then also the way that you're combining the foods that you're bringing together. Some of the other things that can affect intestinal permeability are environmental exposures. This is a very interesting field of correlation to our risk of diabetes because a very little known fact is that the amount of chemicals in your body, these specific ones are called persistent organic pollutants or POPs. They're common, pesticides, herbicides, various different chemical toxins that we get exposed to, thousands a day we get exposed to. You wouldn't think so, but we do.
Yeah, I believe it.
Mhm. Though the amount of those chemicals in your body has a higher correlation with your risk of developing diabetes than your weight does by
Wow.
about a factor of 4.
Wow.
Really, really amazing. So, getting the chemical exposures out of your day-to-day environment where you have control of them. And those are things like your personal care products. The Environmental Working Group did a study a few years back, and they analyzed the number of individual chemicals that women applied to their bodies in their personal care routines.
Oh, yeah.
And it ended up being like over 180 chemicals. Because if you think about it, right, like you look at the ingredient list on your toothpaste, on your shampoo and conditioner, and maybe a body wash and your
Makeup.
deodorant, your makeup, and right, all of those things. And
Deodorant, yes.
you add all of that up, and then you add on top of that like household cleaning supplies, and huge offenders are fragrances, like
Mm-hmm.
laundry detergents and dryer sheets and air freshener sprays. Those are all very, very toxic chemicals to our bodies because they accumulate, and
Yeah.
that accumulation dramatically increases our risk of diabetes. That's part of the reason why you'll often see the so-called skinny diabetic, where they don't have a weight problem at all, but they still have diabetes or prediabetes, because it really, in that instance, may likely have to do more with the gut-related inflammation or the chemical toxin exposure. And then on top of that, we also have biological toxin exposures. That's things like mold, for example.
Mm.
And we have a lot more problems with mold in this day and age than we used to, probably in part because we now build our houses out of drywall, which is paper.
Yeah.
And we also have more, for environmental reasons, right? We try to have it be more energy efficient. And so
Yes.
the buildings are more closed up, there's less ventilation.
Yes.
And then also interestingly, because it's looking like in some early studies that molds, whose defense mechanism is to make mycotoxins, right? Those are their defense toxins, but they're really toxic to us and other animals and other bacteria. That's how they got discovered, penicillin being the first mycotoxin to be discovered. So their defenses are increased in the presence of Wi-Fi by a lot.
Wow.
And so now we're thinking that maybe part of the reason that we're seeing so much more mold related illness, which is often unidentified, it's a very common problem. It's very rarely identified unless you're seeing a practitioner like me that's been educated on this and has done a lot of work in this area. But that changes your gut microbiome, it increases your inflammation, and it can create more insulin resistance. So that's another environmental factor. You don't want to ignore mold. If you're
Yeah.
aware of a mold problem or even a water damage problem in your home,
Yeah.
that needs to be addressed because that causes a significant amount of chronic illness. It can promote autoimmunity, which is way more common in women.
Yes.
And it can trigger all sorts of different problems because it just adds to the inflammatory load in the body. So that's a big area where we have control.
So clearing up your gut issues could eliminate a lot of these problems. So what do you recommend that women do to start improving the gut and closing the gap of permeability in the intestinal lining?
Yeah, well, certainly if you're someone who has significant symptoms or you have an autoimmune diagnosis, you really should get with a practitioner to help you to work on that because that needs a treatment level of intervention. If we're just looking at how do we try to help the gut be as healthy as possible, then
Yeah.
it's going back to our food choices, to those, wide, colorful range of fruits and vegetables, eliminating the simple sugars and the carbs. These are all the things that we're doing in our diabetes reversal group protocol. That is what we're creating because part of reversing diabetes is reversing this increased intestinal permeability. Eating lots of fiber. Fiber is really important.
Yeah.
The non-soluble, insoluble fibers help to feed our gut bacteria. It's their food from our food. And so when those fibers come in, then the bacteria make certain substances that help to seal up the gut lining. So we have this very, very interdependent relationship with our gut microbiome and with the gut bacteria.
Would, oh, go
So,
ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, alcohol, if at all, in moderation, because alcohol definitely increases intestinal permeability. So we want to be very aware of that and very cautious with that. And then all of the chemical things that we talked about,
Yes.
right? Reducing our exposures helps us to be able to heal better.
Right. Would you suggest digestive enzymes to help with your gut?
Sometimes, yes, sometimes digestive enzymes can be helpful. They're not necessary for everyone, but
Okay.
particularly, some examples. This is not medical advice,
Right.
but some examples would be like perhaps somebody that has a lot of bloating after they eat. It could potentially be helpful there. There could be other medical conditions that can cause that, but that's one place where it can be very helpful. If somebody has food reactions, digestive enzymes can sometimes be very helpful to break the food down into smaller components that aren't going to trigger that immune response.
Mm-hmm.
So, digestive enzymes can be helpful. Probiotics, of course, can be very, very helpful in shifting the gut microbiome into a healthier state. Those are all potentially things that we can use.
Right. Right. Let me see, because I have a whole bunch of questions here. Your
Sure.
DRG approach. What is the DRG approach?
So, really, it is the collection of things that we've been talking about. So, it's
Okay.
a root cause intervention, it's the food personalized to help the body reverse diabetes. So, DRG is diabetes reversal group. That's
Okay.
mhm. And then it's the lifestyle intervention. So we need to make sure that the body is moving because a moving body is more sensitive to insulin and it better utilizes the blood glucose. So
Ah,
that's important. It also exercise helps to protect the brain from cognitive decline. So that's important. And then our sleep. Sleep is going to help with not just rest and time to repair, but also sleep is the time when the brain offloads its
mm-hmm.
toxins and its metabolic waste, just the normal daily stuff that it gets exposed to.
Right.
And so if you don't have good sleep, then you basically are just kind of accumulating the trash, right? The trash starts to overflow, and then that damages the brain by creating inflammation. So these are the things that we're looking at while we're focused in DRG on diabetes reversal. These interventions are helpful in every arena of health and in all of the chronic diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last piece of it's a patented program, by the way, patented to reverse diabetes, which is fun. And the last section is community. So, building community, having health coaches involved in helping people to navigate change, to successfully create behavior change so that it becomes habits for a lifetime, and helping them to navigate obstacles and be able to successfully incorporate those changes so that they can be happy and healthy.
Yeah. And live long, vibrant, healthy lives. Because there is,
Exactly.
yeah, a lot of people look at midlife as the decline of life, and I
Yeah.
don't see it like that at all. I really don't. What about supplements, herbs, anything like that? Do you suggest?
Mhm. We utilize some customized supplements. Mostly, we're looking at replacing nutrients that are almost always deficient or depleted in people who have diabetes or prediabetes. And then we use some for anti-inflammatory activity, some to help improve the insulin sensitivity, so the way the cells respond to insulin, because there are some herbs that can help us with that. And what am I missing? Oh, fish oil,
Oh,
omega
yes.
3s, super important. Omega 3s are one of our natural anti-inflammatories. So when we get deficient or depleted in omega 3s, we're missing our own defense system. So we can't defend. And then we bring in all of this sugar, and it may not be sugar the way that people think of it, right? When people think about sugar, they think only about sweet things,
Yeah.
candy, cookies, cakes, pies, things like that. But all things that are made with flour, with refined flour,
Yes.
have almost the same blood sugar response in your body as those things we think of as sweet things. So we really have to be eliminating the things that are driving that blood sugar metabolism abnormality.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Yeah. So, when women try to make changes, what mindset shifts are essential for them to create long-term transformation?
That's such a good one. I think one of the things that we often battle with as women, and particularly women in midlife, because most of us, by the time we reach this phase of life, have had at least some battle or effort involved in maintaining our weight or losing weight, or
Yeah.
some with yo-yo dieting, some with, many, many types of diets. And it's all because you can't just focus on the calories. That is really a take-home message. But I think that the biggest part of the mindset is that your choices, why do you want to be around? Why do you want to have your health? Why do you want to be vibrant and full of energy instead of sitting on the couch with your knees aching? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the reasons why you want to be this and not this? Because those need to be what you're focusing on when you're having to make changes to your habits. Because these ways that we eat, while we think of them as, this is the norm, or, X, Y, or Z is a treat, and I don't want to be deprived, and all these negative mindset components, those are all cultural. There
Mm-hmm.
are many cultures in the world that don't ever eat any of those foods.
Right.
So you have to you've been brainwashed. And
Yes.
it's not brainwashing, you've been taught. This is cultural. This is how we've been brought up to view food. And in our culture, processed food that takes little or no effort to eat, that somehow has become this pinnacle. But it's the very thing that's making us sick and making
Yes.
us feel like this person over here. So when you're having to make that choice or choose something other than, what you would like, that's the mindset that you need to have. I'm choosing this because I want this for my life, not I can't have that, or I'm not allowed to eat that anymore. You're your own person. You're allowed to do whatever you choose,
Right.
right? So it's you who are choosing. It can't be imposed on you, because if it's only imposed and you don't internalize it and want it for yourself, then you won't be able to be successful long term. And we have a saying that we say around here, and that is, you can't want someone's health for them more than they want it for themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's a hard one, because we
Yes.
know what we can see. We know what's possible. We know the amazing transformations that people can experience. And it's so hard to not want that for someone really, really badly. But some people are just, they're not ready. They're not ready to make those changes, but they can be. They
Yes.
absolutely can be.
It must be very rewarding for you when you do see your patients reversing diabetes, improving their health, and it just shows all the way around, right? They've
Yeah.
dropped weight, their skin looks better, everything about them changes, their energy
Mhm.
levels, all of it. That must be so rewarding for you to see that. I
It
can
really
only
is.
just imagine. Yeah, what a beautiful thing. I love that.
It really is. And you're right about the skin. Obviously, you've seen it too, because it is one of the fascinating changes that often you'll see earlier than some of the other things. Weight will come off, not because we're specifically focusing on losing weight, but the
Yeah.
body lets go of what it doesn't need. And
Yes.
so when we start fueling it the right way, it doesn't need that anymore. And when we get rid of toxins, because toxins are stored in our body fats,
Yeah.
when we get rid of toxins, the body doesn't need the fat as a storage depot. And so we can just see that come off, just melt away. But you're right, it is really amazing how much their skin will change and just how the glow of healthy circulation, right? There's a reason for that expression, a healthy glow.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Dr. Burke, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave my audience with, or anything else that I haven't touched on, asking you questions that you'd like to share?
Well, you've done a really great job of asking questions. So
Thanks.
I appreciate that. We've covered a lot of ground. I would say that if people want more information or want to
Yes.
learn more about our program, they can go to reverseyourdiabetes.com. And that's our website. Lots of good information there. You can book a free demo just to hear more about the program and how it might work for you. So we would absolutely love to have you and invite you to do that. I also just recently gave a TEDx Folsom talk
Oh,
that was released on the TEDx platform. That's called The Brain You Save Should Be Your Own. And so, in the same way that we've been talking about diabetes reversal, in that I talk about how we can use these similar concepts to prevent cognitive decline and reverse dementia. So, those are some great places to take a next stop. And I hope that this information was useful for your listeners.
it
And
was fabulous.
I
Thank
hope we
you.
help more people to find robust health.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. This was such a pleasure. I absolutely love what you're doing, and you just embody it. Like it just fills you up. I could see that
Yes.
you're lit up with it, and that's beautiful. That
Thank
really is. Good luck and the best of luck with everything.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Susan LoPresti Wellness, Mind, Body, and Soul. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Kristine Burke for sharing her expertise, her wisdom, and her absolute passion for helping women reclaim their health, not by managing decline, but by reversing it. Her message is such an important reminder. Midlife is not the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of a new opportunity to rebuild strength, protect the brain, balance hormones, and take control of your metabolic health in a powerful way. If today's conversation opened your eyes or gave you a spark of hope, take one small step. Get curious about your blood sugar, your sleep, your stress, your habits. As Dr. Burke reminded us, type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance are not destiny. They're changeable, preventable, and even reversible with the right support. And remember, when you heal yourself, you don't just change your own life, you change your family, your home, and the generations that come after you. If you loved this episode, please follow, leave a review, and share it with another woman you care about. And be sure to tune in next Tuesday for more conversations that help you heal, rejuvenate, and live with intention. Until then, take care of your mind, your body, and your soul. You deserve to feel vibrant at every age.